particularly in relation to varying costs of living and other variables. See measuringworth.com/calculators/p-power-UK. Where required, an approximate figure only is given. Slaves. While the complexities, politics, and emotions involved in the historical iniquity of black chattel slavery are beyond the scope of this book, that experience has resonances with the story of Condemned. In historical debates over the transportation system, in the media of the day, in government reports and inquiries, and in the accounts of some transportees, their situation is described as slavery. Many were also treated as slaves and suffered slave-like conditions of labor, abuse, and coercion. But their sufferings were time-limited. Some of their rights were, in theory at least, protected, and their bodies, and those of their descendants, were not the property of an individual who might have the power of life and death over them. Other than the relatively few black chattel slaves who were transported for insurrection, mainly between the Caribbean colonies, transportees in colonial America, the West Indies, and elsewhere in the Empire were not slaves, even though they might be sold as bonded labor, as their servitude was intended only for the period of their judicial sentence. Transportees in Australia were never sold, had legal rights which they sometimes successfully exercised, and laboured only for the terms of their sentences. Many suffered badly, but they were not chattel slaves. However, in many cases, transportees believed and stated that they were slaves, were frequently treated like slaves, and were often described as slaves by observers, including some with a close knowledge of their situations. Despite these contemporary observations and perspectives, the condemned people whose stories are told in this book were most definitely not slaves, and attempts to portray them as such are pernicious and false, as shown by many historians. Introduction. Empire of Chains. In 1806, the Venus, a 45-ton ship, set sail from Sydney, New South Wales, in the direction of Van Diemen's Land, a penal settlement known today as Tasmania. The Venus carried crucial cargo for the few free migrants who had settled there, supplies, workers, and convicts who would be put to hard labour. The first mate, American whaler Ben Kelly, had a thin, whiskery face scarred by smallpox. A prominent scar disfigured the second mate's cheek. A mulatto seaman wore his hair tied up, and heavy rings distended his ears. An unnamed Malay cook, 2 cabin boys, a soldier, and several seamen rounded out the crew. The ship's captain, Samuel Chase, was a hard man, and trouble lay ahead. 2 of those aboard the brig were women. Middle-aged Kitty Hegarty was much inclined to smile, and had a loud, hoarse voice. Charlotte Badger was fat and bad-tempered. She had arrived in Australia in 1801 when she was just 23 years old, finishing a 7-year sentence for stealing her master's goods. At first, Charlotte was an inmate at the notorious female factory at Parramatta. Modelled on the English workhouses, this female establishment was supposedly a place of useful labour and necessary punishment. Its inmates were regulated and cared for according to official dictates and their own needs. It was not unknown for women in the factory, very nice young women, to marry an elderly man and go to live with him on an isolated bush farm. The reason was simple. If a convict woman married a free man, she became free herself. Charlotte, however, lacked the conventional physical attractions that might lure even an old husband. She was assigned as a servant to the wife of a local free settler. But after a few years she was returned to the factory expecting a child. Like most convict women who fell pregnant out of wedlock, Charlotte refused to name the father. It might have been a soldier, another convict, or perhaps a settler, as enforced sex between female servants and the males who effectively owned them was not uncommon. Whatever had befallen Charlotte, she once again found herself voyaging, now with her infant, beyond the seas. Bad weather kept the Venus at Twofold Bay on the south coast of New South